Hey everyone, Stephen Donziger has been disbarred. Now, if you don't know who Stephen Donziger is and you clicked on this anyway out of curiosity, let me tell you. Wow, this goes all the way back to, I would say, 25 years, 25, 27 years. 27 years ago, roughly, Donziger launched what became the lawsuit against Chevron. You see, between 1967 and 1992, Texaco had formed a consortium with the country of Ecuador called TexPet. It was to produce oil. To make a long story short, by the end of the consortium, it was 67% owned, 89% owned by the country of Ecuador. Ecuador's involvement in TexPet was so complete that in 1989, it had no involvement in what Ecuador, the state-run oil company of Ecuador, was doing within the consortium. Texaco signed a contract to do environmental cleanup, which it says it completed at the cost of $40 million in 1998, But that wasn't enough for Stephen Donziger. In 93, he filed a lawsuit claiming that environmental cleanup had not been done. And by 98, Texaco had done the work. In 2005, Chevron inherited the problem when it bought Texaco. So, to the layperson, Chevron was in Ecuador, but Chevron was never in Ecuador at any time. What happened was that when Texaco left the consortium and the consortium folded, it for all practical purposes became Ecuador. Ecuador took over the old fields and production facilities that were ran by the consortium. But because of a number of politically directed reasons, people never knew that. They were under the assumption that it was always Chevron, when in point of fact, Ecuador was causing spill after oil spill after oil spill. Okay. But Donziger, eager to extract what he acknowledged would be billions, and at one point said it was going to make him a billionaire from the lawsuit, not only ignored those facts that I told you, but set up a gigantic fraud to achieve a multi-billion-dollar judgment against Chevron. He bribed judges, he intimidated judges, he had judges harassed, and on top of all that, he hired consultants and then directed those consultants to falsify information. Then he also ghost wrote the decision for the Ecuador court against Chevron. He basically, Stephen Donziger, wrote himself a $19 billion check, which the Ecuador Supreme Court later lowered to $9 billion. But at that point, and only after millions in legal expenses that were gained by Chevron, did many people realize, hey, you know what, this is a fraud. Consultants admitted that they were asked to provide false data, that they were admitted to dramatically bump up environmental damage costs. There are a whole litany of examples. But the one place where all of this began to start to come down, in other words, begin to start to unravel, was after the release of the movie Crude. And Crude was a documentary, supposedly, of what was purported to be Chevron's environmental damage in the Ecuador. But the outtakes gave a complete and clear picture of a person, Stephen Donziger, who was intent on crafting an argument to achieve an objective, not telling any truths. He said that, among other things, what he had to do in Ecuador, he hated doing, like, for example, bribing judges. There are any number of instances of scenes where Donziger is plotting parts of this different fraud. This is all in the outtakes. And that is where everything began to come down. So, the truth of the matter has never been released. The sad truth of this, and this is something that goes all the way back for me to grad school at Berkeley, is that just because an American company is in a third world country does not mean the country is doing bad. What you should always look for is corruption within the government of the third world country itself, within the society of that country. There are reasons that these countries have quasi-caste systems to keep the high political mucky-mucks up and the lower working class down. That has certainly been true in Ecuador. And to achieve his objectives, Donziger had no choice but to partner with Rafael Correa, who was the president of Ecuador. He basically, Donziger did, help cover up the bad deeds of Ecuador and not cleaning up the environmental damage it caused when it took over and continued to operate the facilities that it once shared with Texaco. I'm talking about many thousands of gallons of oil spills that may very well continue today. Wouldn't doubt it at all. I haven't researched that in about a year, that specific issue. But it's been just a year. Okay. So the lesson here is look unflinchingly at the society of the country that you're studying. If the environmental damage is coming from the very people who run the country, do not fear to point it out. I told this to Amazon Watch years ago. They said, quote, "We'll get to it." They never have. And it's because they had a partner in Korea. Donziger had a partner in Korea. Someone helped him do his dirty work. That's exactly what it was. Subscribe to Zenny62.